Alrighty, so good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Julie Yak, and I've got just a couple of announcements for us, and then we're going to just jump right in and have some machine learning and Power BI. So obviously, yes, we are recording today, so if you do not consent to your being recorded, either in the chat window or if you were to ask a question, then go ahead and exit the meeting now, and then you can watch it later as we post that recording. We are always looking for speakers. We want to help grow the speaker pool that we have for our events, both the virtual events and any conferences and whatnot. So if you're interested in presenting to our group, if you're interested in starting your speaking career, we would love to help mentor you along the way and to get you started. If there's a topic you're interested in hearing about and you're not the one to present it, then drop me an email, let me know, and I will do my best to find a speaker that can cover that for us. So coming up, we've got Scott's coworkers, Joel and Sean, talking about common configurator mistakes. And then in January, we have Abe, who will be covering integrations with the Azure Service Bus. And I think you'll notice a trend here that in addition to our typical let's open Visual Studio and write some code topics, we are doing additional supporting topics with analytics, with configuration, because all of those skills go hand in hand for all of the participants on the behind-the-scenes team. So if you're a developer, you need to be aware of those configurations that you can and should be managing. So we're going to continue that trend to help make us all more well-rounded professionals so that we can be better contributors to our team. So with that, I'm going to pass off to my friend Scott, because you're here to listen to Scott talk about Power BI and machine learning, not for my voice for all these little announcements. So with that, Scott, jump in, and if anyone has any questions for Scott, by all means put them in the chat panel. And if you would like to unmute yourself and ask him the question, feel free to do that. If things get out of hand and we can no longer hear Scott's presentation because of all the questions, then I'll mute the audience and we'll go from there. But I can't anticipate that being a problem. So by all means, jump in and ask questions as they arise. Scott, I see your point, so I'm going to go on mute and hand it over to you.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Very good. Well, thanks, everybody. This is going to be a rapid-fire presentation because I've got a whole lot of material to cover. I wanted to make sure that I give at least a taste of all the different topic areas that fall under this connections of Power BI and CRM, as well as just a little bit of taste of the machine learning piece as well towards the end. It's a growing area of value for anyone implementing CRM right now is the analytics piece of it. CRM is such a fantastic tool for execution on data, capturing the data, working it, but then on top of it, taking the data out of it and summarizing it and being able to draw insights off of it is that's sometimes an untapped market or an untapped resource that Power BI can help take advantage of. Well, Power BI, let's talk a little bit about Power BI, and I've got several areas I'm going to cover in different perspectives, but I thought I'd just start off with why Power BI when I already have charts and graphs built into CRM. Well, it's a fair question because there are charts and graphs that we already have built in CRM, and we've got dashboards in CRM. But if you've gone through an implementation where you really try to stretch the boundaries a little bit, you really run up against some boundaries in the out-of-the-box native tools pretty quickly. For instance, obviously within the native tools, you can't add supplemental data. All the data that's in the Power BI, in the out-of-the-box graphs reflects just what's in CRM. They are interactive and inline, which is great, and they have that security layer built onto them. But there's the limitation of not being able to go after data that doesn't exist in CRM to help supplement the CRM data. Also, when you get to a larger scale, 50,000 records is pretty much where you tap out at in terms of summarization there. And every time you load those, you're hitting your transaction database. So there's a possibility of some performance hit if everyone's hammering those dashboards pretty heavily. Power BI takes away some of those limitations and gives us an advantage of some really cool visualizations, a mobile experience that's far and above what the out-of-the-box visualizations can do, and it really gives us an opportunity to explore the data that we have in there. So for our purposes today, I wanted to show a demo of an example of data in CRM and how to explore it in Power BI. And I'm using a data set that I think is pretty common, the Titanic data set. Let me move on over to CRM here. And let's open up and look at CRM data and the Titanic data inside of CRM, and we'll explore the whole pieces that are there. So what you're seeing here is my Titanic database of CRM. And in the passengers are just contacts in CRM, and each passenger I've got a couple of pieces of data about them. Over on the right side, I've got one of the native out of the box charts, or a native chart that I've configured for this, which has some really great advantages. For instance, if I click on one of these slicers here, it will resort or filter the left-hand side to reflect just the group that I've selected here. Additionally, if I filter this group and say, let me just grab the gender, and we'll pick just the males, I'll filter that. The dashboard, this chart on the right, once I refresh it, will refresh to show the percentages based on what I filtered on the left. So that interactivity is really useful. And that's a nice advantage that the out-of-the-box tools have. However, once we want to take a look and go a little deeper onto it, let's look at a dashboard that I've built into this. So if I go to my dashboards, this is a native CRM dashboard, but I've also added into it a Titanic dashboard. The first one will be, this is where I've just exposed a Titanic dashboard inside of CRM. And this Power BI dashboard is pulled in, and I've got additional types of ways that I can explore the data. You're seeing some visualizations that we don't have inside of CRM, some ways in which we would summarize and roll up data differently than we can do inside of CRM. Even things as showing like infographic type data and maps. All of those are taking advantage of Power BI visualizations that I've then exposed as a dashboard inside of CRM. Let me open this up, and let's just go on over to Power BI and look at it from another perspective. So here's a dashboard, and if I drill in and look at the data here, you're seeing data that I'm pulling out of CRM and into this Titanic dashboard. The nice thing about, or one of the advantages of using Power BI to visualize the data you've pulled from CRM, is you have these slicers. We call them slicers on the left, and I can choose to say, let me limit it to just the children in that were on the boat, and see that details about the children. There were 108 children aboard, 54% survival rate. If I looked at just the 30-year-olds. I can slice that and say, let me see who the 30-year-olds were. They were some of them were part of the staff of the passenger staff, some of them were passengers, and then a good number of them were working as crew on board the deck of the Titanic, on board the Titanic itself. Other visualizations that I have, I can interact with them, like, for instance, if I just said, let me just identify only the passenger staff, I'll just click on that, and I can see the rest of the dashboard sort of highlight just the passenger staff information, and I can see details about them. In fact, I even see that of the passenger staff, of the female passenger staff members, 100% of them survived, which is an interesting slice of the perspective. You can see that. That ability to interact with the data is really useful. Some of the visualizations that are fun are kind of interesting. Like, for instance, in this case, this one reflects the percentage of people aboard the Titanic that perished. And as you'll notice, if I click on a slice here and say, let me look at the female crew, 16% of the female passengers perished, which was a very high survival rate. Or if I look at the male aboard, 78% of the males aboard that were crew perished on board. So just an interesting way of helping tell the story about what's going on in the data. If I look down below, I can see other ways to visualize it and seeing, bar charts, graphs showing the percentages for different groups. If I look at, for instance, the deck crew and highlight that, 67% of them survived. Well, why would that be? Maybe that prompts a question that wants you to investigate more about what's going on. And then maybe think, well, okay, of course, the deck crew is the one who are manning the lifeboats. They're the ones who are actually rowing the boats. So, of course, they would actually have a higher survival rate. If you remember the movie, spoiler alert, if you remember the movie, The Musicians, as the boat goes down, 100% of those people, it was kind of a poignant moment in the movie, 100% of the musicians, the 8 musicians aboard, they perished in the Titanic. But as we go through this, we can look at it, take another perspective and say, let me just look at the deck crew. And I can right-click on that and choose Drill Through and go to a passenger type report that's highlighted with just that one passenger type. And I've got all the details on here reflect the filter that I came from out of the first dashboard and said, okay, now I'm just looking at the deck crew, and of the deck crew, 100% of them were male. We've already seen that they had a 67% survival rate. You can see where they came from. Most of them came from Southampton. A few of them came from Belfast. But even within here, one of the nice advantages is I can link this information back to CRM. Of course, all these are contact records coming out of CRM. And if you'll notice here, I've got a hyperlink. If I click that hyperlink, it goes back to CRM and opens up the record for that individual that I just clicked on. And so I can see the information about James Anderson and what was going on with James. So that interactivity and building that back and forth between CRM and Power BI, I think really tells a lot about how do we engage our users so that they take advantage of the data that we're able to provide to them. So taking another look at it from a different perspective, I can show the dashboard here. So show the dashboard. I can even go into a mixed dashboard where I include both Power BI graphics alongside native CRM graphics in a mixed environment. One thing to be aware of, however, if you'll notice, all the ones that are the 2 Titanic dashboards, well, I've got one that's Titanic, but it's only CRM data. The ones that have Power BI in it are personal dashboards. Now, that's a characteristic we have right now, so that if I want to share a dashboard, if I want to put a Power BI dashboard in CRM today, it needs to be a personal dashboard. I need to go into CRM, create a personal dashboard. I can then share that personal dashboard with other members of my team, either individually or as a team. But correspondingly, I also need to go to Power BI and make sure I share the dashboard from Power BI to the same team members. We don't have it, it's not fully integrated in that perspective, but just be aware that when you're putting dashboards in CRM with Power BI elements in them, they need to be personal dashboards that you can then share to others. So just as an FYI.
Scott, are you keeping an eye on the chat panel? I
am not.
Okay, we've got a question here. Is the link back to CRM a relatively new feature?
It's not. It's one that I added. Let me see. Let's see if there's a tip of the day. CRM tip. Is it 687 hyperlink? I'll just go there. And 782. There's a tip you can hyperlink from Power BI back to Dynamics. And I'll take that chat. I'll just drop that in the chat window here. And boom. So that's a tip that will talk you through the process of creating a hyperlink inside your data. Part of that is an assumption that you have brought in the GUIDs of the records that you want to hyperlink from Power BI back to CRM with. So that's as soon as I add those hyperlinks, you can see that it creates a URL that has my Power BI instance there with a ID, which is the GUID of the record that I'm on, and then a logical name saying that it's going to the contact entity. So I think that's a nice feature to include, because again, it makes that interactivity work very nicely between the two. Another perspective is, once we have this data inside of Power BI, let's take a look at this. I'm going to open up my, let me mirror my screen here, and I'm going to open up the same dashboard inside of, let me go here and open up Power BI as a web app, or excuse me, an application on my iPhone. And in here, I can see the same information as a manager. I can interact with it. Because I've published it to PowerBI.com, I can use the Power BI apps as a user. And so maybe I have a question about this particular chart. I can open it up, and it's opening up from PowerBI.com, and I can see details about it. And you know what? I'm interested in something, so I'm going to click on the little, there's a little pencil down at the bottom, and I can click on it and say, you know what? I'm interested in this detail here, because the children, they were the one group that had a higher survival percentage than anyone else. And I'll just put a sticker on there saying that's a happy thing. But what I can do from there is click the share button in the upper right-hand corner, click share, and open it up and send it as a message to Julie. And Julie will get a message saying, hey, take a look at this. And you have a message now saying, hey, I'm interested in this detail. Would you take a look further into what's going on here so that we can know what's happening? So as a manager, I can interact with the data and ask questions about things that might be standing out separately from the organization, so that we can also look at, let's say, take a look at this slicer. I think I'll turn it sideways. It should open up. Souls aboard. Yeah. So I can see that of the first-class passengers, you can see the percentage of those first-class passengers that survived versus perished. I can also go to the report itself and open it up from here. Now, I'm just using an iPhone like 6 Plus on this case, so I do have a little bit more screen area than a standard iPhone. However, take another look, and we're going to open it up to, let me go ahead and disconnect from this one, and I'll open it up inside of my iPad. You can see that as a manager, more and more of my managers tend to be walking around with tablets or iPads, which is interesting. And instead of walking around with laptops. And now I'm going to open up as soon as you get that. Okay, now I'm seeing my screen. I'll go ahead and go on into Power BI here. And so this is the Power BI app on a mobile device, on an iPad. And I can get into the data, look at it a little more detailed. I have the same up in the upper right-hand corner. You see the notes. I mean, I can create annotations and go further into it. I can even drill into the report that's underlying it and see what that report looks like on my iPad. So as a manager, one of the nice things that I strongly encourage is use this to help surface the data that you're working so hard to get people to put into CRM. Surface that to your management team or your leadership team. Give them summaries. Arm them with the information that you have in CRM so that they can start asking questions, and that will again drive usage of CRM, which I think everybody wants to make sure we have engaged on that perspective. So stop that. Let me take a look at another tool that we have within it, which is actually a new piece that I've added, and this is taking a look at if I look in, let me see, go back to passengers, and if you're looking at the passengers, I've got passenger types down here. Let me look at, let me choose one here. Well, we'll just do engineering crew. So the engineering crew, those are typically the men that worked down in the belly of the ship that were shoveling coal, etc. They were the engineering. So if I go to the engineering crew, and looking at just that passenger type crew. If you'll notice here, I've added, and this is a custom piece. I've added this, and I can show you how to do this. I've added a Power BI hyperlink here, so that if I'm on the passenger type record, I can click on that, and it will take me back to Power BI and open a report that's focused exclusively on the engineering crew. So now I'm going from CRM to a drill down, and let me see the details about that particular record. So it might be that I have a hyperlink there from a customer record, and I can drill from CRM over to a Power BI report that I then filter to the customer that I'm on, and so I can see details about service cases they have open, how many, like the lifetime value that we've calculated, as well as I can bring in data from other sources, maybe ERP backend data. I can bring that forward and display it in a Power BI report in a way that I can't bring the data into CRM and merge it there. But it gives you that interactive experience back and forth. A real powerful tool that you can do to then, again, it's making it seamless to move between the two applications, and so that you really have a chance to interact. Taking a look at another perspective, I'll show you how that actually works. That's probably worth taking a look at for a second. So this is the ribbon workbench that probably everybody on the call has already worked with. And in this case, there are two ways to do it, and I would suggest Scott Duro has a tool called Quick Buttons. And I don't have it installed on this one, but I'd encourage you to try that. And I'll post a link to his the smart app that he has, but you can use that to create a button, and in the button it calls, I just pass it the record that I'm on and let it know that I'm on a record. I want to pass a GUID to it. Once I go to the report, that report then gets filtered to the record that I'm on. In fact, if you look here at the filter, I'm filtering the passenger type ID, which is my custom entity, and I'm passing in that GUID for the record that I'm on. That way, it just makes it a nice seamless interaction there between the two. And of course, if I needed to, if I just really wanted to go down the rabbit hole, I can always click here and go backwards back into CRM and open up a particular contact record. When I look at having all this power in our hands, which is really fun, and it's very cool. We have to take into account some of the aspects of how do we get the data into CRM? How does it? What are our deployment options there? I want to kind of make sure that I clarify how things can be, because this is an area that gets a little bit confusing because there are some options. And anytime there's options, you have to make choices, and when you have choices, that can become a little confusing at times. But I've got two options that I want to cover. One is a desktop-only option, and the other is using a Power BI Online or the Power BI server that exists now. Let's say that we're looking at CRM data up here. We got CRM data, and that could be either on-premise or in the cloud, either one. At this point, we'll call it even at this point. And I have a choice. The easiest way, or the kind of the most simple way to start with, is if I have people out there with Power BI desktops. Those Power BI desktops can connect directly to CRM individually and consume the data coming out of CRM. But what's happening in that case is that there is data that's in CRM, and a copy of that data is being moved down to each of those individual desktops. And whenever that person wants to get fresh data, they have to hit refresh and get new copies of the data. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off there, because these desktops are pulling a local copy of the data individually from each other. A better advantage, or a better approach, might be, and by the way, if I do this, it is free. There is no license cost for the Power BI desktop by itself. I've got 4 Power BI desktops. I've got 4 reports. I've got 4 copies of my data. Power BI doesn't cost me anything at this case, other than the time and effort to build it. Another approach might be if I wanted to go with PowerBI.com, where I push the data up into PowerBI.com, or I can use there is a Power BI on-premise server as well. But if I would go to PowerBI.com, and that way the users, instead of pulling to the desktop, they can just consume it with their mobile app or with a web browser or the tablet, or they can see it hosted inside of CRM. That would be the way you can get it to show up inside of CRM, is you have to have it published to a common location. In this case, again, I do have CRM data, but I've just got one copy of the data being copied to PowerBI.com. And that way everybody's using that one copy. It does help because at that point I've got a single dashboard. Everybody's got any dashboard I have, I've got a copy of it, and the people that I've shared it with can use it. Everybody's using the same copy, and I can set it up to refresh on a regular schedule behind the scenes and get it up to date. And it's a useful approach. That does allow me to embed the tiles in CRM, enables the mobile and common version of the report. Anyone who's publishing to that or consuming that does need a Power BI Pro license. US retail, that's $10 a month. If you're an enterprise, it's probably going to come in quite a bit cheaper than that. But there is a requirement for a Power BI license in order to either share or consume a shared report in Power BI. Let's take another. I want you to kind of keep a picture of this in your mind, because I'm going to take a different approach and then we're going to merge these together. Another piece we need to be aware of is how do we connect from CRM to Power BI? Slightly different topic, but we're talking about how do we get the data out of Power BI or out of CRM and into Power BI, especially if we're dealing with CRM in the cloud. In that case, I've got three major ways I can get the data out. One is I can do a direct Odata query, and that's where I'm open up Power BI and querying the data from Power BI, hitting the web API in CRM, pulling it down, consuming it, whether I have it on a desktop or whether I push that to Power BI service in the cloud. Either way, I can interact with it that way. So let's take a look at those approaches. Here's the first approach. Let's say I do an Odata feed, and that's just, I'm pulling it through the API. I go straight to PowerBI.com. Advantage of it is it's zero infrastructure required. I don't have to install anything. All I have to do is build the configuration and go for it. It's probably appropriate for small work groups or some simpler approaches, and maybe even a first cut at some dashboards. This could be a way to deal with it. I do this when I'm interacting with a environment for a demo data, where I don't want to install anything into their environment. I just want to consume the data, display it, and work with it from that perspective. I don't have access to SQL. I don't have access to anything else. That's a simple way. Performance is okay up to about 100,000 records. You can go beyond that, but it starts getting a little slower and slower over time. It does require use Power Query to query the data. And I will throw out a shout out to my friends over at Sonoma Partners. They have put a tool out on their website called a Power Query Accelerator, and it does a nice job of formatting a Power Query query so that it will consume the data from CRM. And it does a much, much better job than using the native out-of-the-box CRM connector. In fact, I'd just say, just forget that thing ever existed, the out-of-the-box thing. Forget it existed, because you really have to work, you have to put in a whole lot more effort to use it, because it doesn't pull back labels. It's just quirky. So the Power BI, the Power Query tool from Sonoma Partners, and it's a free tool. Just go to their website, and I think you give them your name and address and sign over your firstborn or something. But anyway, they do a nice job, and they've made that available. I took the approach that they did. I'm customizing it myself. I'm tweaking the Power Query to do a few other things that I want to do to it, but it does make it easy to use. In fact, let me show you what that looks like. And I'll go to, do I have Power BI open? I have Power BI open right now. So let me open up Power BI. Yep, there it is. So I've got Power BI open, and let me edit the queries. And if you'll notice here, advanced editor, this is what that query, this is my version of that query. And in this case, I'm creating a link to the CRM web service, telling it I want the tickets entity, and here's the fetch XML that I'm passing up and saying, these are the entities that I want, or these are the attributes that I want. I can put a filter on it saying I only want it, I only want active records. Like in this case, I've got state code equals 0, which means I'm only pulling back the active records. I can do that, put the filter in there. It also brings back the data. Along with it, I pull the formatted value, which is the label for the option sets. It's one of the things that the out-of-the-box tool does not do. This will pull back the option set label, as well as then I can just rename the fields to, instead of WSL passenger count, I've got it, into a business-friendly names. Once I have that, then I've got, a table here that has that data in it that I can consume. Take a look at passenger and crew. This is, again, coming from the contact entity. I'm bringing back the ticket value, the ticket label, the contact ID, just the regular fields that I need in order to consume that. And if I look across, I've got, like, for instance, the gender. The out-of-the-box tool will only bring you back a 1 or 2. And in this case, I'm bringing back the label associated with it using this approach. So I do give a thanks to the Sonoma guys for releasing that, because that's really helped. It will produce something similar to this. You can start reworking it if you want to make some adjustments, but they've done a nice approach. They've given a nice approach, and I've just started with that approach, and I give them all the credit for getting that started. So that's the approach where I'm going OData against CRM, and it is relatively fast. I mean, I can refresh the whole data, and it'll pull back in a matter of a few seconds, a minute or so. If I'm dealing with, so it's already pulled down the 2,500 records. But if I need to pull back hundreds of thousands of records, or I've gone as far as about 175,000 records through this, it gets a little slow. So you want to be thoughtful of that and not try to overtax it. So once I've taken that approach, I do have that ability to pull down the data. Let's take another look at another option that we have, which would be to pull the data into the data export service. Now, the data export service, if you've tried that, is a really nice tool that the CRM team put in place that lets you replicate data from CRM as transactions take place, creates, updates, deletes. They get replicated from CRM over to the data to a Azure SQL database. That can then serve as a source for Power BI if I just want to query the data directly that way. I was working with Chris the other day, and Chris and I were talking about some options that he had, and this would probably be the best option if you've already got the data out in that tool. That's fantastic, and you can build your queries very, very quickly that way. So let me open up let me open up another version of CRM here, just so that you can see what that looks like. And I'll go to Titanic. I've got it in my Titanic environment. I'm a little bit obsessed with Titanic, but you can forgive me for that. So I'll go to Titanic, and inside of this, pull it up here. Take a second to load. The out-of-the-box tool, and this is, in fact, if you install the Power BI Accelerator from Microsoft, there's a Power BI Accelerator that they released as a trial app, or not a trial app, but a sample app. They go through this process of building it as an export. So let me go to Whitestar. I think I can get it there and go to, sorry, I can't go settings, data export. And I'll click over, and this is the way they set it up. And in fact, if you haven't tried the data export service yet, use the Power BI Accelerator, because it will set up all the tools between you and Azure in order to make this work. There's a couple of settings that you have to go through. It's not too bad, but once it, sorry, it's not, get to load. Hopefully it'll load. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. All right, we'll let it go. We'll let it go.
Well, guys submitted it, Scott.
Okay, thank you. But once it gets going, let's see. Let me open up this one. But it has been rock solid. I've got customers right now moving more than, I'm going to say 100 million records through the data export service just to create exports of the data that they have. It works great, and it does give you that. It does give you the option, the ability to interact with the data outside of through SQL, which, if you know me, I love SQL, and so SQL's second language for me. I can interact with it. So this is the data export profile. I just went through Firefox and it seemed to open okay. If I go to the data export service, I can load this, and you'll see a link from here. Hopefully you're not in a hurry, or you're not presenting. But you'll see a link from here that you just define which entities that I want to interact with, and it will start a sync. And so as records are created in CRM, or as they're updated in CRM, it'll sync to the SQL table, and then you can use that as a source for your Power BI, data. What you will want to do is, when you get it into that data, that exported data, you'll need to join against a table that has the option set map, string map. It's like the old string map table that most of us old timers are familiar with. You'll use that to pull in the labels associated with option sets, but you'll create yourself a nice view that filters out the data that you don't need and only includes the attributes that you are interested in, includes the labels. Push that out. That becomes a source for Power BI. Terrific approach that way. So that's another way we can attack the challenge. What that does allow you, that does give you that option of, gives you a relatively simple way to implement it. Like I said, the example from the Power BI team that will configure the whole thing for you, very useful, because there are some, the instructions are kind of tedious, but it'll get you out there. The cons, calculations, you're having to put everything in Power BI. Performance constraints, not too bad, but governance, you're still doing a lot of the work back in Power BI, moving it out. The way we approach it for enterprise customers is that we put in between those two places an Azure Analysis Services tool. Azure Analysis Services becomes the query engine for Power BI. If I don't have Azure Analysis Services in place, all the query effort takes place inside of Power BI, and it goes up against SQL here, or back to CRM, either one. If I put Azure Analysis Services in here, the query workload gets moved up to Analysis Services, and then Power BI just becomes a visualization layer. If I do that, that puts all the calculations in one place. And so if I build a calculation that says survival percentage, I can use that in every report that I create. I don't have to create a separate version of that calculation in every report. I have one source, one single version of the truth. If I need to make changes to it, I update it. All the reports that consume it from there will have that same version of the truth. A much better approach, definitely a scalability. You got some huge scalability options there. You can add some security, which we'll talk to in a minute, but it's very straightforward. You don't have to learn a different language from Power BI. It's DAX in both of them. You're using the tabular version of it. And millions of records, governance, all good. It is expensive. It's not cheap. It's depending on the size of the implementation. It could be a few $100 a month to run that, but it is a good option to be aware of. Now, I've mentioned I was going to pull those two together. Think about it from this perspective. This reflects the implementation that we've done even for our own internal use. We're using the data export service, and that is bringing data from CRM over into Azure SQL. From Azure SQL, it takes that same data, or a portion of that data, and moves it into Analysis Services, which then we actually are able to put a lock over and put row-level security inside of Azure Analysis Services, that's a feature we can't do inside of Power BI. By putting in Analysis Services, we can put the row-level security on top and make sure that whoever interacts with that data, because the visualization layer is there and all the query is done up here, that way the user who interacts with it is only seeing the data that we've given them permission to see. Very important and more enterprise approaches. It is a tool, as well as that source can be used for power users that want to do self-service analytics. And when I'm interacting with it from that perspective, I'm not pulling down copies of that data, but all the query again is taking place up in this analysis services, but I can build dashboards here, publish those back to PowerBI.com, and other users can consume those. That's the approach we take. It's really a very scalable approach and also gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of ensuring consistency between them all. I probably ought to stop and take a breath. Are there any questions that have come up so far about Power BI with CRM? Because the next topic I want to talk about is the Power BI with analytics, the analytics piece. So I'm looking in the window, get the smart button link. Good, thank you, Chris. And Julian, yeah, you've got the XRM Toolbox plugin called the Power BI Option Set. That's one that was built by Tanguy probably over a year ago, and that's helpful. But I would say that I would probably still prefer going with the Sonoma Partners tool, because that way I don't have to then merge all that data together locally in Power BI. All the data is pulled in from CRM with that. If you use the Power BI option set builder, you have to keep that thing updated, and you're creating another entity in CRM. You have to refresh it anytime you make changes to a option set, but it is available there for you if you need it. Any tools to map, Philip? I see any tools mapping from the D6365 security to Power BI SQL? Not really. You can, if given enough time and money, you could create a filtered view inside of SQL. When you export it out to the tool, you could recreate a filtered view, because it's possible to export all the tools you need for that. I'm not going to say that's going to be very fast. The other piece of that is interesting, because you think about this module that we have in. Let me go back to this approach maybe. So if I'm looking at this dashboard, the data is being pulled out here, and once it comes out, you don't have the access to the CRM data source and the CRM security engine anymore. You're pulling it into Azure SQL, and at that point you have to create your own security layer there if you need to. But even then, your PowerBI.com users have to be able to, you're pretty much going to be limited to desktop applications if you want to try to replicate that. The reason I would kind of warn against getting too hung up on following that path would be, a lot of times our Power BI reports that we're putting in for customers deal with data at a much more aggregated level. Think about a KPI layers where maybe we have a team of salespeople that inside of CRM, they can't see each other's opportunities. They're prevented from seeing the details of each other's opportunities there, but we can put it into Power BI and let them see a leaderboard, so they can see that, Chris is up, $1 million over the quarter over his nearest competitor, and we can expose that data as an aggregate in Power BI without actually giving permission to see the details below the scenes, below those numbers in CRM, which is a real advantage you have using Power BI to summarize data, pull aggregates up, and show that level for either a manager or from a broad perspective of details. Even things like KPIs around case closings. Perhaps you could look at a team's aggregate case close percentage or case time to close of the case. They could look at that percentage in aggregate without displaying, without sharing the details of the specifics of the individual cases. So think about it as a little bit different perspective than the SSRS reports that we all know and love, that hit fetch and consume that data directly. So a couple of possibilities there. The other pieces, let me take a look and see. I think, yep, thanks very much, Hayden, for mentioning that there is a beta of the Power Query Accelerator for the toolbox. I've tried it and gave some feedback already, and so I'm looking forward to seeing that fleshed out. So that's really nice to see that coming along. Let me take a push down here. I'm going to show you one other tool here while my animation work. Everybody's excited about that. Azure Machine Learning. So now that we've gotten data out of CRM and we've started looking at things like we can see trends of this data. For instance, like we said earlier, we noticed that overall, men had only a 19% survival rate on board the Titanic, unless they were members of the deck crew, and then they had a 67% chance of survival. Through basic regression, we can take that and take that data that we're learning about take the information we learn about the data that we have in CRM and start consuming that and taking advantage of it using Azure Machine Learning. This is a piece that I was working on earlier in the year, and I was surprised at how far I got very, very quickly. And I'll give a shout out to Lucas Alexander. I think it's AlexanderNet blog or Alexander, but Lucas Alexander did a blog article about AdventureWorks, and I ripped off pieces of his code out of that blog post and rebuilt that for my Titanic data set. And now let me show you what that gives us, and I'll actually show you where that all happens. So let me go to passengers. So think about, we've got these passengers in here, and let's say that I'm a travel agent booking people on the Titanic. All right, talk about a bad job description, but I'm booking new passengers on the Titanic. Think about these as effectively like leads for this. And so let me add a passenger. I'll just pick a name at random. C. Cognetta. Just nobody, just a completely hypothetical name. And then I'll put a male, and I'm gonna make him a 35-year-old. Probably a little low, but and because Chris is a friend, we're going to put him in as a member of the deck crew. So he's a member of the deck crew. He gets on at Cherbourg.
Tickets, please. Tickets.
Yeah, exactly. So we're putting you on in the deck crew. But what I can do, as soon as I have this data in here, I'll hit save. And what's happening behind the scenes is two workflows are firing. One workflow takes the data that we have on here, and when I'm doing a save, it takes that data, wraps it up, sends it to an Azure Machine Learning instance. That instance then scores the likelihood of this person to survive based on the attributes of other survivors that we have, that we've already identified. So think about leads that you closed that turned into customers. Customer leads that are out there, how likely were they to close? Then you get a brand new lead. How similar is it to the existing leads that you have? And maybe apply a score to put a predictive score of whether or not they're going to close. And in fact, you'll see that the data came back, and Mr. Cognetta survived, and we think that he has a 62% chance of surviving the trip, which is interesting. But let's turn it into dollars. I said there's two workflows that fire. The second workflow says anybody who comes in above 50% as a likely survivor, let's go ahead and create an opportunity for that person to sell them travel insurance. So again, it's taking the idea of we're scoring people based on the information that we have in them, about them, and trying to turn that into dollars later. And behind the scenes, all it's doing, and it's really simple. It would be a lot more fun if it was really crazy, but all it is I'm taking a machine learning prediction, and this is some of the code from Lucas, but I created an Azure Machine Learning demo, and if I click the properties here, you'll see that I'm passing in the gender, age, embarkation port, and passenger type, and I'm calling a web service. Once that web service returns data, I update the contact with the outcome prediction and the prediction confidence score coming back from Azure Machine Learning. And then once that's been populated on any new contact, when a contact's created, I update if the outcome prediction is equal to survived, I create an opportunity for that person. So again, taking that data that we have, trying to turn it into dollars, making that, let's see, Studio, Azure Machine Learning, just so you can see how simple this actually is. Again, shout out to Lucas Alexander for the sample code that I took that and modified it to fit the data that I have, and sure enough, all it is just this little workflow that goes and fires and creates a web server. We create a web service with it, and it fires off. So again, turning that data back into something useful that we can generate dollars in our environment, generate additional value in. And it could be something other than a sales opportunity, but you could look at saying, we're with an insurance organization we're already working with right now, and we're saying new leads that come into the insurance organization, we're looking at the type of lead it is and then routing it to the right person that can best address that case. This is claims management, and we're looking at ways to say, okay, this one is a very normal claim. This is a very common type of claim. We're going to route that to our general team, but we look at other claims and say, this one has resulted in additional effort. Similar ones to this have resulted in additional effort, and so we're going to route that to someone who has dealt with claims like that, and so we route them that way. Again, it's that taking that machine learning, adding it to CRM in a very simple way, and turning it into tremendous value. I think I'll take a breath at that point. Is there any other questions? You probably tell I get excited about this stuff. It's a lot of fun to work with.
It's great listening and watching. This is wonderful.
The interactivity you get, just the cool stuff you get to do within it. For instance, this ribbon chart, if you'll notice the light color, it represents the survival. If you'll notice, the only people who had a higher percentage of survival than the parish were the children 0 to 12 years old. I can also look at it from another perspective. Let's drill in and look at males and females. If I look at the male population, way more of them perished than survived, and the female population and the children, the 12 and under, higher percentage. And think about the old phrase, "women and children first," onto the lifeboats. You can see that play out in this data. You can also look at the types of passengers that were on board. You just sort it by souls aboard. You can see that third-class passengers by far the largest group, and most of them did not make it. Until you get down to the first-class passengers, that's the first group you get that you have more survivors than those who perished in that group. So really interesting to be able to interact with the data. You can do other things with the visualizations to help tell the story about what's going on. In this case, I'm looking at what's called the sand dance chart, and I see the data grouped up by each of these little boxes represents a person, and I can look at passenger type. There's crew, passengers, and staff. The dark blue represents people who survived. The light blue represents the people who perished. So this would be like the passengers. That would be like Leonardo DiCaprio, and this would be what's her name? Rose. I can't think of her name. Kate Winslet. She would be there. If I look at gender, you can see the gender. By far, the largest group on the boat was the males. And chivalry order. Each one of those just kind of represents a a different way of visualizing the data and understanding, trying to tell stories based on what you're seeing in there. So cool, good stuff. Any other questions? I think I'm kind of at the top of the hour.
We do have one question. What's the cost involved with Azure Machine Learning?
So the Azure Machine Learning, in my case, building this off of the Titanic data set, I had, we'll say I had about 3,000 contacts that I ran through it. Think about it, a machine learning project a few years ago, before you could even get started, your machine learning you're talking about a $500,000 investment to get started. So you have to have these really big, expensive problems you need to solve. With Azure Machine Learning, there's actually a free space that you can start up and build a machine learning example. In my case, I built mine before the free space was available, the free edition was available. And in my case, I ran my 3,000 contacts through, and I spent like $1, less than $2 worth of Azure Machine Learning time to score all those leads. If you'll notice, I score these. It's costing me less than a cent per contact that I run through here to score them. So you think about the ROI difference that takes place now. You can use Azure Machine Learning to score data. Obviously, if you're going to run 500,000 records through there, you're going to pay more, but it is based on your usage and not it's not a flat rate. So it's really useful.
Scott, you got the workspaces there. Does that allow you to have multiple Power BI reports in there?
Yeah, so if I create a workspace, that's the preferred way of sharing Power BI dashboards to other people. And in fact, you can look and see my workspace. I've got my Titanic dashboard. Within it, I've got the reports associated with it. I've got the data sets underlying it. So I've published to an app workspace, and it lets me share that app out to other members of my organization. One thing I probably should point out here is the refresh. I'm looking at the data set. Here's my Titanic data set. This little circle here points to the refresh option, and it asked it to refresh the data. But if I look down at settings, I'm going to click on settings here. Click on settings, you can see that I've entered credentials. Well, it's asking me for my credentials. Let me enter the credentials. OAuth. I'll give it my my credentials. And once I've got that, I've got it set to sign. I've got to keep my data up to date, and I can set up, I think, 4 times a day using the basic environment, 4, maybe 8 times a day. I forget. Anyway, a handful of times a day, it'll refresh the data for me. I can schedule it and keep it up to date. That's that's in data sets, and just go to data set settings. Cool. Any other questions? Excited about moving out, tackling this stuff is fun.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott,
your
can
enthusiasm.
you show us the code?
Pardon?
Can you show us the code where you're using the Accelerator again to pull back the values of the pick list?
Yeah. So if I go to the Accelerator here, let me go to Power BI and go to edit my queries. So I think I have a query open already. There it is. And I'll look at this one's actually one of the smaller ones, passenger types. Go to Advanced Editor. So up here at the top, this portion is really, this really is from the Sonoma pattern that they wrote, and I give credit to them. But I put in between there, I put in my entity, the fetch XML that I want to pull it from. It pulls that back. And by the way, one of the nice things that they did was this sets it up as a loop, so it'll pull through 5,000 records at a time, and it will loop through until it finds no more records to pull.
Okay.
So that's one of the advantages there. Turn it into a table and then expand it out. This WSL group, that'll be the, for instance, the ID, and the one below it, WSL group, Odata, community formatted value, that will return the label associated with it. So that returns that option set label.
Okay. And then when you pull it from there, you get this top piece, obviously. The other pieces you've heard it as far as creating as a table. But once it's a table in Power BI, can any of the reports reference that table?
Yeah, anything based off any report built into this Power BI instance. So in this case, I've got 4 reports, 4 pages of reports.
Yep.
And I've got those, and I can reference that on this. I can't reference it from a different Power BI file. That's where moving to Azure Analysis Services moves that query structure outside of Power BI and up to Analysis Services, and then other dashboards and other reports can query the same data.
Well, I got my weekend homework. Thank you.
There you go. Good. Good times. Good times. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's been fun.
I really
Julie?
appreciate it, Scott. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop.